We're ready now for step 5, which is the actual courtship itself. In this, we will look first at the wrong way to have a courtship, and then we will look at the right way. There's some overlap, but we're focusing primarily on what not to do first. In a book written to young people, page 450, it says, "Courtship as carried on in this age is a scheme of deception and hypocrisy with which the enemy of souls has far more to do than the Lord. Good common sense is needed here, if anywhere, but the fact is it has little to do in the matter." This is referring to the tendency to hide our bad points and to seem really wonderful to the other person. And so they fall in love not with the real us, but the one that we project. And since we're together only a portion of the day, usually, occasionally maybe all day, we are well able to hide the things we don't want the other one to see. We know that the other person won't like certain things, but this is not a good plan, because once we get married, there's very few things we can hide from our partner. And if they feel like they've been deceived and that we are different than what they thought, it tempts them to want to call off the marriage. So it's far better for us to be ourselves and allow the other person not just to see our good qualities, but the weaknesses that we have as well. If they don't want to marry us with the weaknesses we have, it's better to know that before marriage. Same book, page 446. A deceptive courtship is maintained. Private communications are kept up until the affections of one who is inexperienced and knows not whereunto these things may grow are in a measure withdrawn from her parents and placed upon him who shows by this very course he pursues that he is unworthy of her love. The Bible condemns every species of dishonesty. This is speaking about those who don't want their parents to know about the relationship because they know that their parents wouldn't approve. And so they try to carry on the relationship secretly from them. Now, if they don't live at home, it's quite easy to do that. But as we studied earlier, we really need to get parents' advice from the very beginning and make sure that they also agree about the courtship we're going to have. Same book, page 445. He who would lead a daughter away from duty, who would confuse her ideas of God's plain and positive commands to obey and honor her parents, is not one who would be true to the marriage obligations. So that person may be very attractive, and I sort of get the idea that this is talking about a man that's a little bit older, and he's trying to win the heart of a young lady who doesn't know all the things that he knows and doesn't really realize. Now, if she would counsel with her parents, they would be able to help her. But in this case, he is afraid of that because he's pretty sure that her parents would not agree. And again, same book. Satan is constantly busy to hurry inexperienced youth into a marriage alliance. So the worst thing we can do when we're in a courtship is to be in a hurry. Now it's true that youth, like in their teens or early 20s, may be more prone to make that mistake, but it's not just those young ones that do that. When we're in too big a hurry, we can be sure of one thing: we will not really know the other person before we get married. And so to take all the time, I generally recommend something around a year. Longer is certainly fine if we want to, but to be shorter than a year probably indicates that you're going to have a number of things you didn't learn about your partner, so you can't really decide for sure. You may go ahead and marry them, but when you find out, you just might find out that the very characteristic that you in your heart said, I never want to marry somebody with that, and now you find out they have it. So taking time is a good idea, and the wrong way of courting is to be in a hurry. Really, the courtship days are some of the happiest days of your time together anyway, so why cut it short? Satan is busily engaged in influencing those who are wholly unsuited to each other to unite their interests. He exults in this work, for by it he can produce more misery and hopeless woe to the human family than by exercising his skill in any other direction. You can hurt somebody the most if you live with them and you have characteristics that are very either frustrating or hurtful to your partner. So Satan is the one that is interested in us hurrying up to get married because he loves to have unhappy marriages. He knows the pain that will cause, and so he's always pushing to get us to get married, when what we really need to be doing is to be checking every way we can the compatibility that we have to each other. You might worry that, well, if I give up this one, I might not get another one. But it is better, as many people have learned, to be single rather than to get in an unhappy marriage. However, it doesn't mean that someone else won't want you. Somewhere there's someone that does not mind the weaknesses that you have. It does not trouble them, does not make them want to leave you, and that's the one you want to get. And the same the other way, that your weaknesses don't unduly irritate them. Now, it's very hard to find someone you agree with 100%, but we have to evaluate when we find out the differences. How irritating is that to me? For instance, let's take one case that I was aware of. The man was very, very neat and tidy. Everything was in its place. And he had married a wife that just left things all over the place and things are often a mess. Well, that really bothered him. And so it led to fighting and saying unkind things and producing a lot of unhappiness. Whereas if he had watched for someone that was also neat and tidy, he would have been happier. Of course, that's just one characteristic, and we need to look at all of them. The good name of honor is sacrificed under the spell of this infatuation, and the marriage of such persons cannot be solemnized under the approval of God. They are married because passions move them, and when the novelty of the affair is over, they will begin to realize what they have done. In 6 months after the vows are spoken, their sentiments toward each other have undergone a change. Each has learned in the married life more of the character of the companion chosen. This one has a direct reference to the habit of starting physical attentions very early in the relationship. And it's easy to feel good about someone physically. It's not hard. In fact, it tends to make us overlook their weaknesses, maybe not even notice them, or at least we assume they will never bother us. But what is driving us is not how compatible we are, but how good we feel about each other. And that's why it says that they are married because passion moved them. And sad to say, today, many people go too far to even having a sexual relationship before they get married. The deeper we go with the physical relationships, the less likely we will be to weigh everything that we see about each other. We don't want passion. Passion is given, that is the appropriate use of it, is given to weld two people into one under the marriage vow, rather than to get them to feeling so good about each other that they want to get married. So I recommend leaving aside even the holding of hands, because when you start the physical, pretty soon that doesn't express the way you feel, and you want to take the next step, and then that one doesn't satisfy the way you feel, and then where do you stop? And many people don't stop anywhere. They go all the way to the sexual relation. So if we leave that aside, I think it's appropriate in the engagement period to get started, because that's a short period and we're going to get married. This kind of marrying and giving in marriage is one of Satan's special devices, and he succeeds in his plans almost every time. So Satan even has the power to cause us to even be more excited about the physical, and he is so happy when he can lead someone to want to get married based on the physical. I have the most painful sense of helplessness when parties come to me for counsel upon this subject. I may speak to them the words that God would have me, but they frequently question every point and plead the wisdom of carrying out their own purposes, and eventually they do so. I've had the same experience. I've counseled with quite a few people that were courting, and due to the experience, I've had I recognize, and due to what I know about the parties involved, I recognize this is not a good match. And yet, if you try to convince someone about that, it almost never works. It would work possibly if we could talk to them early enough. But usually people get started, they start the physical attentions, and then they come asking counsel. And almost every time they will not back up. I've even told people that I didn't believe had Bible grounds to marry again, but they didn't stop. They just went right ahead and married anyway. So that leads me to believe that the earlier we can educate people on this, the better. And it's even good if we could do it before courting starts. Advice is only thrown away on those who are determined to have their own way. Passion carried such individuals over every barrier that reason and judgment can interpose. We need a lot of reason, a lot of judgment in this relationship, because just because we're attracted to somebody doesn't mean that they're going to be able to make us happy for the rest of our life. And that's why we need to have older, more experienced people giving us counsel. As we studied before, God is our main counselor. Our parents are next. And then people of long experience who love God, they can help us to go through this decision. The habit of frequently being in the society of the one of your choice, and that too at the sacrifice of religious privileges and of your hours of prayer, is dangerous. You sustain a loss that you cannot afford. This is talking about the practice, two things that are often practiced. Number one, that we feel like we have to be together every spare minute. As soon as we're off work or as soon as we're out of school, whatever, we've got to be together, and we spend lots of time together. And the other practice of being with each other late at night. When we pass 9 o'clock, our ability to control our emotions goes down. And so if we are wanting to leave aside the physical aspect of courtship, that will be much harder. And then there's even a worse problem. Some people will stay away from some of the church services. You know, we have the service on the weekend, then we have prayer meeting. And if we start skipping those meetings because we want to spend that time together, here we are at one of the most important decisions of our life, and we are weaker spiritually. We need to be the strongest we've ever been spiritually while we're making this decision. So either staying away from religious services so that we can be together, or staying together so late that we can't have our private devotions. We're too tired when we get home or when we are ready to get into bed. And so we just skip our devotions. We need religious services, and we need to be faithful with our devotions during the time of courtship. The habit of sitting up late at night is customary, but it is not pleasing to God, even if you are both Christians. These untimely hours injure health, unfit the mind for the next day's duties, and have an appearance of evil. My brother, I hope you will have self-respect enough to shun this form of courtship. Now, in today's world, I guess nobody thinks that you're doing something you shouldn't. But in the old days, when people had more restraint that they felt was appropriate, in fact, there was a time they had, I'm trying to think of the name, chaperones. They had chaperones. And if somebody was spending time together with no chaperone, then people thought, what are they up to? And they thought evil of them. So that day is past, but regardless of that, we need to conduct ourselves in a way that if somebody was watching, that they would not be concerned about anything we're doing. And of course, God is watching. We have a guardian angel that's watching all we do. We have God able to watch, and we need to live in His sight. The last one in this section of the wrong type of courtship, the prevailing sentiment is that in this matter, the feelings are to be the guide. And in too many cases, lovesick sentimentalism takes the helm and guides to certain ruin. You see, there's a counterfeit. Satan has a counterfeit for every good thing that God has. He has a counterfeit. And God's plan is that we will have true love for someone if He's leading us to marry. But Satan tries to stir up what's called sentimentalism here, lovesick sentimentalism. You could put any name on you wanted, but it's not the real thing. And the problem with this is that it disappears. It's attracted by maybe the physical features, attracted by the physical attentions, and so it seems really wonderful, and yet it can't last. There's no way it can last. So it usually lasts though up until you get married, and then after marriage it can disappear in either really fast. I had one young lady call my wife on her wedding night, and she said to my wife, "I have made a terrible mistake." Well, that's the fastest one I ever saw, but it can happen in a month, it can happen in 3 months, 6 months, but that is not something you want to happen. It is here that the youth show less intelligence than on any other subject. It is here that they refuse to be reasoned with. And it's not just young people that have that problem. I've tried to help people of middle age as well, and it's very difficult. But in other things, we are very careful. Like if we were going to start a business, we'd be very careful to make sure where we're going to start it, whether a business in that particular location or town is going to work. We'd talk to people who have run those kind of businesses, and we'd examine every angle. We'd check out whether we could get the money to get ourselves going, just all kinds of things. But when it comes to marriage, it seems like most people just decide, do we like each other? And like I say, that can change because it might not be true love. And things that irritate, you might think, well, I can put up with that. But 25 years of it, you might not be able to put up with it. So it's really important to use intelligence and reasoning powers in this process. They do not submit themselves to God. You see, we get to liking somebody and we really don't want God to say, no, this is not the one. But in order to get the right one, we have to really be submitted to God. Lord, if this is the one, okay. If this is not the one, okay. We need to stay in that position as much as possible until the final decision has been made to actually get married. Their senses are enchained and they move forward in secretiveness as if fearful that their plans would be interfered with by someone. So they are really sure, but it's not based on true love. You know, true love can allow others to help think this thing through. We're not so scared when it's true love. But when it's not, then we just don't want anyone to interfere. We have that sense that they probably would interfere if they knew. And so here we see many of the common practices that are still done today, even though this was written 100 years ago. But these practices still exist today and create so much unhappiness in marriage.